The United States military does not build vehicles. It builds weapons on wheels. The US Army has spent 70 years and billions of dollars trying to build something better than the vehicles on this list. It has not succeeded. These are not museum pieces. These are not collector items. These are military 4x4s so comprehensively overbuilt that the armies that use them have never found a reason to stop. 10 vehicles, 10 engineering decisions that made everything built after them look like a compromise. Stay until number 1. The army kept it running for 49 years and never told anyone why. Number 10. Ford GPA 1942. In the winter of 1942, American engineers took a Willys MB Jeep, sealed every opening in the body, fitted a propeller shaft to the rear, and drove it into the English Channel. It floated. That was not an accident. The Ford GPA, officially the General Purpose Amphibious, unofficially called the Seep, a contraction of Sea Jeep, was the first American military vehicle designed to fight on land and water, without modification, without preparation, and without stopping. You did not convert it. You did not attach pontoons. You drove it off a beach, and it kept moving. The engineering behind the GPA was a direct response to the problem that killed more Allied soldiers than almost any single weapon in the early war: the inability to cross water under fire. A standard Jeep could ford 30 inches of still water. The GPA could cross a river, a harbor, or an open stretch of ocean. It was powered by the same 2.2-liter Go Devil 4-cylinder engine as the standard Willys MB, producing 60 horsepower. On land it could reach 55 miles per hour. In water it reached 5.5 miles per hour under propeller drive. A bilge pump ran continuously to handle water intrusion. The hull was welded steel, sealed against submersion. The front axle was fully driven. The driver's compartment had nearly twice as many control levers as a standard Jeep. One for four-wheel drive, one for range selection, one for the capstan winch, one to deploy the propeller, and one for the rudder. 12,778 GPAs were built between 1942 and 1943. The US Army deployed them across every theater: North Africa, the Pacific, the European mainland. Soviet forces received approximately 3,520 under Lend-Lease, where they were used extensively on the Eastern Front crossing rivers that had no bridges and never would. The Soviet Army was so satisfied with the GPA on inland waterways that they developed their own post-war derivative, the Gaz-46, based directly on what they had learned operating the American vehicle. The GPA struggled in heavy surf and open ocean. Its freeboard was too low for rough water. The military eventually preferred the larger DUKW for serious amphibious operations, but the GPA never stopped working on rivers, harbors, and calm coastal waters. It crossed every body of water it was pointed at, and kept moving inland. Today, surviving GPAs are among the rarest military vehicles in existence. The vehicle that circumnavigated the world was called Half Safe, completing the journey between 1950 and 1958. The first amphibious vehicle to do so, a record that still stands today. The US Army built 12,778 of these amphibious Jeeps, and one even circumnavigated the world. Would you rather cross a river in a GPA or a standard Jeep? Comment below. Number 9. Dodge WC Series 1941. In 1941, the United States Army gave Dodge a single requirement: build a 3/4-ton 4x4 truck that could do everything. Dodge built 81 variants on one chassis and did not change the frame once. That number is not a typo. 81. The Dodge WC Series, WC standing for Weapons Carrier, became the most versatile military vehicle platform in American history, and it did it without a single fundamental redesign. The same basic chassis that carried infantry into combat also carried wounded soldiers out of it, towed 37mm anti-tank guns, mounted 37mm cannons, ran as a radio command vehicle, and served as a forward reconnaissance platform across 4 continents simultaneously. The engine was a 230 cubic inch flathead, 6-cylinder producing 92 horsepower, an engine so overbuilt for its intended duty that Dodge continued using its architecture in civilian trucks until 1971. 30 years of production from a military specification engine. The drivetrain used a 4-speed manual transmission with a 2-speed transfer case, open differentials front and rear, and a 24-volt waterproof electrical system that allowed the WC to ford water without stalling the ignition, a standard that most civilian trucks did not meet until the 1980s. Ground clearance was 10 inches. Payload was 750 kilograms. Towing capacity was 3,000 pounds. Every specification was written not for a road test, but for a battlefield, and every one of them was met under combat conditions across 6 years and 4 continents. The WC-52 variant alone, a weapons carrier fitted with a front winch, saw service in conditions that would stop any modern commercial truck inside an hour, and kept moving. 255,000 WC series trucks were built between 1940 and 1945. They served in every US military branch, in every Allied army, and on every front of the Second World War. When the war ended, surplus WCs flooded into civilian markets across Europe, South America, and the Middle East, where they continued working as farm trucks, fire engines, and utility vehicles for decades. The platform that Dodge built for war became the backbone of post-war agriculture in countries that had nothing else. Soviet forces received thousands under Lend-Lease and continued operating them into the 1960s. The WC designation covered everything from a basic weapons carrier to a telephone maintenance truck, a fire engine, and an anti-aircraft gun platform, all on the same frame, all maintained with the same toolkit, all driven by the same engine. No modern truck manufacturer has ever produced 81 variants on a single unchanged chassis. No modern military has ever asked one to. Dodge built 81 variants on one chassis. Which WC variant was the best? The ambulance, weapons carrier, or command car? Tell us below. Number 8. AMCM 422, Mite 1959. In 1946, 1 year after the end of the Second World War, the United States Marine Corps identified a problem. The Willys MB Jeep was too heavy to be carried by the helicopters then entering service. The Marines needed a 4x4 that could be slung beneath a Sikorsky H-19, dropped into terrain with no roads and no supply lines, and still carry troops, weapons, and equipment across ground that would stop anything larger. What American Motors Corporation delivered 13 years later was the M422 Mite, the most technically advanced small military vehicle the United States had ever built, and one of the most over-engineered vehicles of any kind ever to enter military service. The specifications read like a vehicle designed 20 years after it was actually built. The body was all aluminum, welded, not bolted. The engine was a 1.8-liter aluminum V4, air-cooled, producing 52 horsepower, also aluminum, also designed specifically for the Mite, with no civilian equivalent. Independent suspension front and rear, using leading arms at the front and trailing arms at the rear, a system that no standard military vehicle of the era used. Inboard drum brakes front and rear, mounted at the differential rather than the wheel, to reduce unsprung weight and protect the braking system from terrain damage. Limited slip differentials front and rear simultaneously, on a vehicle that weighed 1,700 pounds. Top speed was 65 miles per hour. Water fording depth with the standard kit was 60 inches. The entire vehicle could be disassembled by one person with basic hand tools in a forward area with no workshop support. 3,922 Mites were produced between 1959 and 1963. The Marines used them in roles the standard Jeep could not fill: forward reconnaissance, helicopter insertable weapons platforms, rapid movement in terrain that grounded heavier vehicles. When helicopters grew large enough to carry standard Jeeps, the Mighty Mite's primary advantage disappeared, and production ended. But the engineering it demonstrated, independent suspension, aluminum construction, locking differentials on a sub-2,000-pound military vehicle, would not appear in mainstream 4x4 design for another 20 years. The inboard brake system it used in 1959 was not adopted by civilian performance vehicles until the 1980s. The all-aluminum construction it pioneered is standard on modern military vehicles today. American Motors Corporation built the Future in 1959. The military used it for 4 years and then quietly moved on. The engineering community spent the next 2 decades catching up. The Mighty Mite had technology decades ahead of its time. Have you ever seen one in person? Let us know below. Number 7. Dodge M37 1951. 6 years after the Second World War ended, the United States Army looked at the aging WC series trucks still serving in Korea and gave Dodge the same brief it had given them in 1941. Build something tougher. What Dodge delivered in 1951 was the M37, a 3/4-ton 4x4 that incorporated every lesson learned from 255,000 WC series trucks across 6 years of global warfare. The result was a vehicle so comprehensively overbuilt for its era that 115,000 of them were produced between 1951 and 1968, and armies across 4 continents are still running them today without modification. No other truck in US Army history has achieved both a production run of that scale and an operational life of that length. The M37 used a 230 cubic inch flathead 6-cylinder engine, the same architecture as the WC series, refined for reliability. But the military specifications surrounding that engine was what separated the M37 from anything Dodge sold to civilians. The electrical system ran on 24 volts, fully waterproofed and sealed against submersion. The ignition system was designed to operate after complete immersion in water. The transfer case was a new process 200 unit with 2 ranges and manual front axle engagement. The axle gear ratio was 5.83 to 1, chosen specifically for low-speed torque in mountain terrain, which the Korean peninsula had in abundance. Deep water fording was standard equipment, not an option. The M37 crossed 30 inches of water without preparation. With the standard fording kit, it crossed 60 inches. The 24-volt electrical system stayed sealed and operational in conditions that killed every civilian truck wiring harness ever built. 115,000 M37s were produced across 2 production runs. They fought in Korea. They fought in Vietnam. When the US military phased them out in the 1970s, foreign armies bought every one they could find. Today, M37s are still in active service in mountain armies across Asia and the Middle East. Not as museum pieces, not as parade vehicles, but as working trucks doing the job they were built for in 1951. The engine is a 1930s commercial architecture. The drivetrain is unchanged from the day it left the factory. They are serviced with basic hand tools by mechanics who were not born when the last one rolled off the production line in 1968. The M37 B1 variant, produced from 1958, incorporated minor transmission and spare tire updates. The only changes Dodge needed to make across 17 years of continuous military service. Dodge built the M37 to survive a war. It survived every war that followed. It is still working today. The Dodge M37 is still serving in some countries today. Have you ever driven or worked on one? Tell us below. Number 6. Willys MB Jeep, 1941. More than 626,000 Willys MB and Ford. GPW Jeeps were built between 1941 and 1945 on an identical specification, interchangeable down to the last bolt. The Bantam, Willys, and Ford companies had each submitted competing designs, and the Army took the best features of all three and standardized them into a single vehicle that none of them had designed alone. General George Marshall, Chief of Staff of the United States Army throughout the Second World War, called it America's greatest contribution to modern warfare. General Dwight Eisenhower listed it among the 6 pieces of equipment he considered most vital to the Allied victory. Both were talking about a vehicle that weighed 2,454 pounds, produced 54 horsepower, and cost $738.74 to build at the original contract price. What made the Willys MB the most significant military vehicle of the 20th century was not its power. It was its specification. The Army's original requirement, drafted in 1940 in 49 hours by a committee of engineers working against a deadline, demanded a vehicle weighing no more than 1,300 pounds, capable of carrying a quarter-ton payload, fitting inside a standard transport aircraft, crossing 12 inches of water at speed, and being maintained in the field by a soldier with a basic toolkit. Willys met every specification and then exceeded it. The production MB weighed 2,454 pounds, heavier than required but stronger than anything competing designs offered. The 2.2-litre Go Devil 4-cylinder produced 54 horsepower from a cast iron block designed to be rebuilt with hand tools in a forward operating base with no electricity and no specialist equipment. The 24-volt waterproof ignition sealed every electrical component against water, mud, and dust. The transfer case provided high and low-range 4-wheel drive without stopping the vehicle. The Willys MB served on every front of the Second World War, in every Allied army, in every climate from the North African desert to the Arctic tundra of Finland. It served as a command vehicle, a weapons platform, an ambulance, a reconnaissance truck, and a supply carrier simultaneously. At peak production, one rolled off the line every 90 seconds. When the war ended, returning soldiers bought civilian versions and drove them across America. Every sport utility vehicle sold today traces its direct ancestry to the specification written in 1940, and the vehicle Willys built to meet it. The New York Museum of Modern Art includes a military Jeep in its permanent collection of 8 automobiles, calling it one of the very few genuine expressions of machine art. The modern Jeep Wrangler costs 75 times more than the MB that inspired it. It is not 75 times better. More than 626,000 WWII Jeeps were built. Do you think any modern military vehicle has earned the same legendary status? Comment below. Number 5. Ford M151 MUTT 1960. In 1951, the United States Army gave Ford Motor Company a contract to replace the Willys MB Jeep, the most successful military vehicle in American history, with something better. Ford spent 9 years developing the M151 military utility tactical truck, and what they delivered in 1960 was so far beyond a vehicle, it replaced that the Army classified the detailed engineering specifications and declined to release them to the public. When the military eventually decommissioned the M151 fleet, it did not sell the vehicles to civilians, as it had done with the MB, the M37, and every other surplus military truck in American history. It crushed most of them. The Army decided the M151 was too capable for the public to own safely. No other American military vehicle has ever been considered too dangerous to sell to the public after retirement. The engineering that produced that decision was extraordinary for 1960. The M15 used a monocoque body, a single welded steel structure combining the frame and body into one unit, identical in principle to the construction method used in modern passenger cars, but almost unknown in military vehicles of the era. The suspension was fully independent front and rear, using coil springs and swing arms, a design that gave the M151 handling characteristics no military vehicle had previously achieved, but also created a rollover tendency at high speed that the Army spent 11 years refining through two successive variants. The M151A2, introduced in 1969, corrected the suspension geometry and added a fixed roll bar. The final production specification included a deep water fording snorkel, 24-volt waterproof electrics, and mounting points for weapon systems, ranging from a 7.62mm machine gun to a Tau anti-tank missile launcher, on a vehicle weighing 1,100 kilograms. More than 100,000 M151s were produced across 3 manufacturers between 1960 and 1982. They served in Vietnam, Korea, the Middle East, and in 60 countries worldwide. When the HMMWV replaced them in frontline US service, the Army considered civilian sale. The rollover liability risk was deemed unacceptable and the insurance exposure too large. The Crusher was cheaper than the lawsuit. Today surviving M151s, the ones that escaped government destruction, sell for prices that would have bought 10 new ones in 1969. Ford built something so capable, the Army decided the American public could not handle it. The vehicles that escaped are now collector items worth more than any modern Jeep on the market. That is a specific kind of overbuilt that no other vehicle on this list achieved. The US Army crushed most M151s instead of selling them. Have you ever seen a real M151? Comment below. Number 4. Cadillac Gauge Commando V 11964. In 1964, the United States military contracted Cadillac Gauge, a division of the company that built America's most expensive luxury cars, to produce an armored combat vehicle for deployment in Vietnam. The Terror Space division of Cadillac Gauge had been designing the vehicle since 1960 and filed the patent in 1962, 2 years before the first production unit entered service. The result was the Commando V100, a fully armored 4x4 that carried a crew of 3 with up to 8 additional combat passengers, mounted weapon systems ranging from twin 7.62mm machine guns to a 20mm cannon, and could be configured as a troop carrier, command vehicle, ambulance, or direct fire support platform, all on a single chassis built by the same company that put chrome trim on the Eldorado. Nobody expected the vehicle holding the line in Vietnam to have been built by Cadillac. The V100's engineering was built around a single requirement: survive everything the Vietnam environment could produce and keep moving. The hull was Cadalloy high-hardness alloy steel armor, proof against small arms fire, and 7.62mm projectiles on all surfaces. The vehicle was fully amphibious without preparation. It entered water and swam under its own power at 3 miles per hour, propelled by the rotation of its wheels against the water. No propeller, no preparation, no stopping. The engine was a Chrysler 361 cubic inch V8, producing 200 horsepower through a 5-speed manual transmission. Road speed was 62 miles per hour. The run-flat tire system allowed the V100 to continue operating after tire deflation on all 4 wheels simultaneously. Its turning radius was tight enough to maneuver in village streets that stopped conventional military trucks at the entrance. Approximately 3,000 V100s were built between 1964 and the early 1970s. They served with the U.S. Army Military Police, the U.S. Air Force, which used them to protect airbase perimeters across Southeast Asia, and with the armed forces of more than 35 nations. The South Vietnamese Army operated them throughout the war. Saudi Arabia used them in the first major ground engagement of the 1991 Gulf War at the Battle of Khafji. The broader Commando family across all variants exceeded 10,000 units produced. The series was retired from U.S. service and replaced by the M1117 Guardian in 1999. What the V100 represented was something American military procurement had never produced before: a fully amphibious, fully armored, weapons configurable 4x4 built by a luxury car manufacturer to a combat specification that purpose-built military contractors had not matched. Cadillac built it. The Army took it to war. The jungle never stopped it. Did you know Cadillac built military vehicles? What surprised you most about the V100? Let us know below. Number 3. AM General HMMWV, 1983. In 1979, the United States Army drafted a specification for a single vehicle that would replace the M151 MUTT, the M561 Gamma Goat, the M880 series, and several other light tactical platforms simultaneously. The requirement was precise: climb a 60% incline, traverse a 40% side slope, ford 2.5 feet of water without preparation, ford 5 feet of water with a snorkel, carry 4 personnel and their equipment, and do all of this while mounting weapon systems ranging from a 7.62mm machine gun to a TOW anti-tank missile launcher. AM General won the contract in 1983 with the high mobility multi-purpose wheeled vehicle, and the engineering required to meet that single specification produced one of the most overbuilt 4x4s in the history of military procurement. The HMMWV's ground clearance of 16 inches was achieved not through a lifted suspension, but through portal axles, geared hubs that moved the axle center line above the wheel center line, raising the entire drivetrain without raising the vehicle's center of gravity. The brakes were not mounted at the wheels. They were mounted inboard, at the differentials, fully enclosed within the vehicle body and protected from terrain damage. The torsion differentials front and rear provided automatic torque distribution without driver input. The central tire inflation system allowed the driver to adjust tire pressure from inside the cab while moving. The 6.2-liter Detroit Diesel 5.8 produced 150 horsepower, modest by civilian standards, but tuned for sustained low-speed torque across terrain that would destroy a standard truck drivetrain in hours. The entire drivetrain was positioned between the frame rails to lower the center of gravity and maximize ground clearance simultaneously. 17 variants of the HMMWV entered service simultaneously: cargo carrier, ambulance, TOW missile launcher, Avenger air defense platform, M119 howitzer tractor, shelter carrier, and more. The U.S. Army procured over 280,000 units. The vehicle served in Panama, the Gulf War, Somalia, the Balkans, Iraq, and Afghanistan. When its vulnerability to improvised explosive devices in Iraq prompted the Army to begin replacing it, the replacement program cost more than the original vehicle procurement. In April 2025, the U.S. Secretary of Defense ordered the Army to stop procuring new Humvees, but did not order the retirement of the existing fleet. Nothing built since has matched the HMMWV's combination of payload mobility and platform versatility at its weight class. The Army tried to replace it 4 times. The HMMWV is still in service. The Humvee replaced 7 military vehicles. Do you think anything today can replace it? Tell us below. Number 2. Oshkosh M-ATV 2009. By 2008, the United States military had lost hundreds of soldiers in HMMWV vehicles destroyed by improvised explosive devices in Iraq and Afghanistan. The Army needed a vehicle that combined the off-road mobility of the HMMWV with the blast survivability of the much heavier mine-resistant ambush protected vehicles then entering service. The M-ATV weighed more than 14 tons, yet had to match the mobility of a vehicle less than half its weight. A contradiction that Oshkosh resolved by building a suspension system unlike anything previously fitted to a military vehicle. What Oshkosh Defense delivered under the designation MATV, MRAP all-terrain vehicle, was a 4x4 that had never existed before in military procurement history. A vehicle simultaneously classified as light enough for mountain terrain and survivable enough to withstand a direct IED strike beneath the crew compartment. The engineering required to achieve that combination was extraordinary. The Oshkosh TAK-4 independent suspension system provided 20 inches of wheel travel, more than any production off-road vehicle available at the time, military or civilian. The V-shaped blast hole directed explosive force away from the crew compartment, rather than through it. The 370 horsepower Caterpillar C7 diesel engine drove all four wheels through a 6-speed automatic transmission. Ground clearance was 16 inches. Water fording depth was 60 inches. The vehicle weighed 14.5 tons, heavier than some Second World War tanks, yet its suspension system allowed it to maintain HMMW V-equivalent mobility across the mountain terrain of eastern Afghanistan, where heavier MRAP variants could not operate at all. The Army ordered 8,079 M-ATVs in a contract worth over $3 billion, the fastest large vehicle procurement in U.S. military history at the time. The urgency was real. Soldiers were dying in vehicles that could not survive the threat environment they were operating in. Oshkosh delivered the first production M-ATVs within 10 months of contract award, an achievement that would normally take 3 to 5 years in standard procurement. In the mountains of Afghanistan, where roads do not exist and the terrain destroys anything not specifically engineered for it, the M-ATV went places the vehicle it replaced could not follow. It saved lives that the HMMWV could not save. No other procurement in U.S. military history moved from contract award to battlefield deployment in under a year. The blast hull, the suspension travel, the ground clearance, none of it was over-engineering. All of it was necessary. The Oshkosh M-ATV was built to survive where Humvees couldn't. Did you know about it before this video? Comment below. Number 1. R.G. Letourneau, LARCLX, 1952. In 1952, R.G. Letourneau delivered to the United States Army the LARCLX, lighter, amphibious resupply, cargo, 60-ton, a 100-ton amphibious 4x4, powered by 4 engines producing more than 1,000 combined horsepower, built to drive off a ship, cross open ocean, land on a beach under fire, and deliver 60 tons of cargo without stopping. Letourneau was a self-taught engineer from Stockton, California, who held nearly 300 patents and built the largest earth-moving machines in history. The LARCLX was his answer to a question no other engineer had attempted to answer. How do you move 100 tons of cargo from a ship to a beach when the beach is under fire and the sea between them is open ocean? Each of the LARCLX's 4 wheels was driven by its own Detroit diesel 671 engine, producing 265 horsepower. 4 engines, 4 independent power sources. One was enough to keep it moving. The hull was welded steel, sealed and buoyant. On land, it reached 15 miles per hour. In water, 7.5 miles per hour under propeller drive. The deck held a fully loaded semi-trailer. Nothing built before the LARCLX had combined that payload capacity with genuine ocean-going amphibious capability on 4 wheels. It entered service in 1952, first saw combat in Vietnam in 1967, and remained in active U.S. Army service until October 2001. 49 years of operational service on a vehicle designed during the Korean War. The army that retired it had been founded 226 years earlier. The LARCLX served for more than a fifth of that entire history. When the military retired the fleet, it sold surviving units to the public. Today they are still working. One delivers cement trucks to communities on Long Island. Another crushes cars at the Lane Motor Museum in Nashville. A third was shipped from Maine to the United Arab Emirates for restoration. They sell for the price of a new pickup truck. Letourneau built them for the United States Army to survive everything the 20th century could produce. They survived the 20th century. They survived the 21st century. The LARCLX entered service the same year Dwight Eisenhower was elected president. It was still delivering cargo when Barack Obama was running for his first term. That is the only measure of overbuilt that matters. Not the specifications on paper, but the decades of work they produced. R.G. Letourneau once said he was just a businessman who happened to make machines. The machines he built for the United States Army are still running today. Nothing else on this list can say the same. The Lark LX served for 49 years. What's the most overbuilt American vehicle you've ever seen? Comment below. Every truck on this list was built to a standard the civilian world never asked for and never matched. The portal axles, the sealed drivetrains, the waterproofed electrics in every modern 4x4, all of it came from these vehicles. They just never told you that. Now you know. The next video is already waiting.